Welcome back to the Lou Perez Podcast. My name is Lou Perez. If you'd like to support the podcast, please head over to thelouperez.locals.com and join the Lou Perez community. If you join, you'll get to listen to the podcast early. You'll get to watch my sketch comedy early, as well as experience other exclusive content. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you're looking for another way to support me, you can do so by supporting my sponsors. So if you're into cold brew, I highly recommend Black Organic Cold Brew. Head over to www.blvckbrew.com and use promo code LOU, that's LOU, and you'll get free shipping. And if you're into CBD products, please check out Paloma Verde, www.palomaverdestore.com. And if you use the code LOU, you'll get 25% off purchases over $75. And if you sign up for email, you'll get an extra 10% off as well. All right, here we go. Very happy to be joined by Matt Thornton, the owner and operator of Straight Blast Gym. Matt, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Lou. I appreciate it.
I love following you on Twitter, but what I really enjoyed was a recent conversation you had with another martial artist named, is it Rokas? Is that how you pronounce Rokas? Yeah, Rokas over at, and Rokas has a really great YouTube channel called Martial Arts Journey. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who, might not be familiar with that, Rokas started out as an Aikido student teacher, and then wanted to test his Aikido skills up against other martial arts. And how did he find you? How did he make his way over to?
I was just thinking that as you were saying that, I was trying to remember how we came into contact. But I believe he emailed me after he had the MMA fight with the guy. I think so. And we began talking after that.
I guess the spoiler alert, Rokas ended up, giving up on Aikido and now trains Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and kickboxing, more of a mixed martial arts system. And it was about 9 minutes in, and you guys started talking about Jeet Kune Do. Mm-hmm. And I was transported back to my I think it was my sophomore or junior year of high school, and there was a kid I went to high school with named Foti, who was a Greek kid, and he was a big dude, and he was training Jeet Kune Do, and I figured, man, this guy's a badass. So Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee's martial art, this has got to be the way to go. Yeah. And so I started training Jeet Kune Do at the time, and something that I noticed was we would do some things that I really enjoyed, that I was like, wow, this seems cool. Like we would hit Thai pads, and we would do it without gloves on. So that already seemed like, whoa, I'm a badass hitting these thick Thai pads. But then immediately after that, we would then do Wing Chun classes. Yeah. That I was like, but this doesn't, like, the way that I'm standing isn't the way that I stand if I'm doing Muay Thai, what's going on here? So, maybe you could sort of tell us a little bit about Jeet Kune Do and how they came about this stuff.
Sure. So I was always fascinated by martial arts since I was a kid. And I had a very particular question for whatever reason that interested me, and that's what works in fights. Mm-hmm. That was what motivated me. It wasn't about looking cool, or there was no MMA, obviously, when I was a kid because I'm old, but it was just what works in a fight and what doesn't. And when I left the military, I had basically decided I was going to continue boxing. I'd done a little boxing, and I was going to try and box, maybe even professionally. But then I was also going to train Jeet Kune Do, because I'd been in a few fights, and I realized whether you have boxing or not, once you hit the ground, you're in trouble. I knew there was a hole there because I'd been in a few schoolyard fights where I've been on the receiving end of mount position or a headlock. And Jeet Kune Do talked the talk of being functional back in the day. But the problem, which you just articulated, was this incongruency in what they did. So you'd have functional delivery systems, as I would call them, with Muay Thai and boxing, and then they would do something that's actually quite silly. And the problem there, a lot of people don't see the issue with that, but the problem is people then become unable to differentiate what works and what doesn't work. And those delivery systems don't go together. So if you have really good boxing, you can learn Muay Thai and blend it in very easy. You can learn boxe français, French kickboxing. but you're not all of a sudden going to start in a pigeon-toed stance and do Wing Chun when you have a boxing base. So the whole thing was kind of a mess for a whole lot of reasons that, you know, we don't need to go into unless you want to, but that my discovery of that led me away from Jeet Kune Do, and the timing of me figuring all that out was about the same time that I met and ran into Rickson Gracie. And when I ran into Rickson Gracie, I was like, this is actually the piece that I needed. This is the piece that's been missing, and my life forever since has been training that.
And by run in, I hope it was in a very nice way.
It was in a nice way.
And not an aggressive way.
It's actually a funny story, because I went to a seminar that a friend of mine in a place called Eugene, Oregon had, which is only about 90 minutes away. And there was only about 25 guys there, which, you know, now if Rickson decides he's going to do a seminar, you know, he's going to have to cap it, because hundreds of people will show up, black belts from all over the world. But this was before anybody knew who he was. He hadn't fought in Japan yet. I think his brother Hoist maybe just fought in UFC. It's right around that time frame. So nobody knew who he was. I walked in, was wearing the typical Jeet Kune Do wear. So I had wrestling shoes and you know, like a Jeet Kune Do shirt and sweatpants. And almost everybody else was wearing a gi. They were judo black belts from a judo club that my friend had gotten to come in with his Jeet Kune Do students to be able to pay for Rickson's seminar. And he was wrestling with one after the other. And I was just watching. He would sit on the mat. One guy would come, and then another guy would come. And after a few minutes, I realized he wasn't using his hands. And he was submitting all of them, but he had his hands in his belt like this. And then when he got to the end and he wrestled with all of them and beat them pretty much effortlessly, he looked at me. He's like, "You, my big friend, come over here. For you, I'm going to take one hand out." He didn't need to, but he did. Took one hand out. He did the same thing to me, effortlessly. I mean, I didn't know anything about grappling, so I figured I'm going to jump on his head and squeeze his head as hard as I can, which is what I did. And, you know, a minute later, I'm in an armbar tapping, and I'm laughing because it was such an amazing experience. And that forever set my course of what I was going to do for my future.
Mm-hmm. And you know, for those people listening who haven't met you, you are a big guy. Are you like 6'7", 6'8", something like that?
Yeah, I'm 6'8", and now I'm much bigger, about 280. But even at the time, I was probably 225. Mm-hmm. Maybe 190.
Yeah, and I mean, it's this might be a weird question, but you know, how was it, you know, navigating martial arts as a big guy? You know, so like when, you know, when you train, especially with smaller people, making sure that you're not just using, you know, your guerrilla strength and whatnot.
Sure. Well, you know, that's not always been easy, and I haven't always been the best at that for sure. It's a growth curve. It took me a while to figure out. Well, let's back up for a second. In the beginning, if you don't know anything about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the size doesn't really do that much for you. That is the beauty of an effective delivery system like BJJ. But so I'd have younger, smaller, 135, 150 pound people tapping me out all the time, and you know, and that in and of itself was amazing to me. But then as you start to go and you start to train more and more, you realize that the less you use strength, the faster you're going to get better at technique. The safer it is for your body, the steeper your learning curve becomes. It only took me about 25 years to figure that part out. I think I really started to understand that and appreciate that probably about the time I got my black belt, which was, I think, 19 years ago. So it took me a while, but everybody, when you come to functional martial arts, is going to have good things and bad things as it relates to height or strength or size or previous injuries, and you're going to have advantages and disadvantages, and through a live training, your body figures out how to operate best. So
in my training with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I've had a number of times where guys who I've rolled with have said to me, "Boy, you're strong." And it's like, and then I you know, at first I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm strong." But then after a while, I found out it's kind of code for you're kind of being a dick. And you know, work on your technique, dude. You know, instead of like trying to squeeze my head off of my neck. Going back to JKD, you know, I'm like a 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid. And I remember one time I was holding pads for a guy who was probably in his 40s. And, it was, holding the pads for him. He's, doing jab cross and stuff like that. And I did one of these things where I just kind of, I put the pads on my chest and I kind of like leaned forward with my head. And this fucking guy eye poked me. I'm holding pads for this guy, and luckily he didn't get me like right in the eye, but he got me like right next to it. And it was sort of like, what are we doing here? What is this about?
Was that a student or an instructor?
A student. Yeah, he was a student. I think he was a higher rank or whatever, but it was a very stupid move. In martial arts, I often hear, it seems like for a lot of people, the go-to when it comes to discussing jiu-jitsu is, well, you put me in this move, I'll just poke out your eye, or I'll bite you, or I'll pull your hair. And what's your response to the invincible weapon of the eye poke?
Yeah. So the difference is I can do that too. Everybody can do that. If you're going to reach for my eyes, I can reach for your eyes. I'll tell you a funny story. I was teaching a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu seminar in Los Angeles, probably 20 years ago. And there was a relatively well-known, famous martial arts instructor who was sitting from the sidelines watching my seminar. I won't say who he is, but he was sitting there. He was polite. He was watching everything I did. And I was teaching knee ride, which for people who don't know, you're sitting with one knee on the body and you can punch and do submissions. About halfway through the seminar, he's like, come over here. I got a question for you. I'm like, okay. And he's like, take that position on me. I put my knee on him, and he reaches over, like he's going to grab my groin. And he's like, well, what do you do if you do this? And I said, well, and then I just gently pushed my fist down into his face and said, I'd be doing that because I'm on top. And he goes, oh, okay. Like that was a revelation to him.
Yeah.
The thing I like about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the thing I try to explain to people about it, is you're not winning confrontations. You're not winning physical altercations because of pain. Pain is the least reliable thing that you can have in a fight. When people have controlled substances in their body, or they're just adrenaline is going, you can do all kinds of terrible trauma to their body, and they'll continue. But with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we're actually physically controlling their body and then gently putting them to sleep if you want to. But I mean, whoever's the jiu-jitsu practitioner is going to be in control of where that fight goes, the space that's allowed, the position that's allowed, and that's everything in a fight, and that allows you to control it without hurting them, instead of every time your drunk uncle comes over, you got to eye jab him or kick him in the balls.
Yeah, and I think we've been seeing a lot of this with especially when it comes to police, and it becomes so apparent when police are trying to apprehend somebody or take somebody into custody. It becomes apparent whether or not they have any ground experience whatsoever. And I know people like Henrik Gracie has been leading a lot of the whole like Gracie Academy has a lot to do with training law enforcement to be able to handle people. And it's almost hard to explain to people like no, you would want a police officer to be able to do anything other than punch you in the face, and anything that having to strike you. You want them to have those skills.
Yeah. No, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the perfect art for law enforcement. And when all this stuff started happening, the answer to me was very obvious from the beginning. It's more training. The answer is always more training. So, unless you're dealing with a bad officer and you have issues with the union and you have to figure out how to fire the guy, outside of those circumstances, the answer for all of this is always more training. And the problem, and the really sad part about what's happened now, so here in Portland right now, we have about a third of the officers that we should have for the city. And shootings since January, at the beginning of the year, are up over 1,500%. And so just this last weekend here in Portland, I think 2 days ago, one night, there was 9 shootings. And in a situation like that, who's going to get training? Every officer that they have needs to be on the street just to be able to try and mitigate some of the out of control violence that's happening now. I know you guys are experiencing similar things in New York. And the first thing that gets cut when people start cutting these budgets is training. So we're actually going backwards we're moving into a situation where law enforcement is going to have less options, and you're going to have more inexperienced officers with less training on the street than you have now, which is sad to see, but that's the reality of what's actually happening.
So I'm an outsider. I'm not in Portland, right? So the only thing that I do see are, buildings burning,
Mm-hmm.
and hearing about shootings and stuff like that. Are these happening in contained areas, or is it sort of like happening all over the place?
Yeah, so you have a couple different things going on that aren't necessarily related. The first one is the out of control crime. The out of control crime happened in Portland about the same time it happened everywhere, and that was due to, what Heather McDonald calls the Ferguson effect. There's just, when pressure's put on law enforcement the way it's been put now, the first thing they stop doing is proactive policing. So here in Portland, for example, we had what's called the Gun Violence Response Team, which was the renamed Gang Task Force. And for about the last 10 years, they've kept a lid on all the gang-related shootings in Portland, and done a pretty good job. But we have a city councilwoman who decided that the Gun Violence Response Team was racist because they spend over 60% of their time in the Black community, whereas I think the Portland population is less than 10% African American, so therefore racist. So she got the Gun Violence Response Team cut. The budgets for the police have been cut. Like I was saying, we have about a third the amount of officers we need now. And guess what happened? Gang-related shootings shot through the roof. So, and the majority of the victims tend to be African American. The newspaper tries not to even report that because they don't want that to be known. But my question for the councilwoman, which I've asked her before, is if 65 or 70% of the victims of these shootings are African American, what percentage of police time do those victims deserve? Do they deserve 8% of police attention, the victims and the families of victims of those homicides, because African Americans are 8% of the city's population? Is that how much they should get? It's just madness. So you have that. Sorry, but this is an issue that's been driving me crazy for a while. And then you have the anarchists, and the anarchists are basically Antifa, and they riot. I think the last 8 days we've had six events, 6 nights in a row in the last 8 days. And what they do is they'll target different neighborhoods, break windows. They'll start with what they call a march, which is their protest. And then as some people march through the streets, others will break off. So when you see their flyers, they say, "Be like water." It's what they mean is break off and come back. They'll break off and break windows, try and light fires, just basically damage property, beat someone up if they can catch them alone. And then usually they target a police station or a federal building. So the federal courthouse or the ICE building that's downtown Portland will be targeted. The problem is these tend to be surrounded by their residential areas too. So you have people that live right next door that have to put up with it. But I've lost track of how many times they've tried to light my local, there's a police station about 10 blocks from here. I've lost track how many times they've tried to burn that building down. They basically just stop painting it. It's just black charcoal up the side of the building now. But those are two somewhat unrelated problems. One's a lot easier to fix than the other one right now. But that's essentially what you have going on in Portland.
Yeah. And, I a while back, I tweeted something out that said, all of the people, calling for violence or, actually engaging in violence need to be careful, because one day men who are very good at violence will answer the call. Mm-hmm. And, you're somebody, with military experience, you've been in, martial arts for seeming like basically like your whole life. It seems like you're a man who knows violence. And what's going to happen? I mean, what's the end game here? What's going to happen to a city like Portland should this stuff continue?
Yeah. The end game, unfortunately, I think is pretty easy to play out. So, I'm myself and other, I'm not going to be a vigilante and risk my business. And
Mm-hmm.
you'll see people sometimes are like, why don't you guys get together and do something about it? Well, the district attorney here, who is very much, if he's not Antifa himself, he's at least an Antifa sympathizer, would love to put me in jail. One business owner comes out of their property when the Antifa creeps are spray painting it and breaking windows and tries to defend it, and that guy's going to be the one that goes to jail. So first of all, we have that. So what's going to happen is this is just going to continue nightly. It's been more than a year now. It's not going to stop until eventually the citizens get so fed up with it that they demand prosecution. And one of them or two of them actually wind up having to spend 2 or 3 weeks in jail in general population, because these are, for the most part, spoiled kids. One of them that's been arrested half a dozen times is a student at Reed College, which is a very expensive university here in Portland. And he's not going to survive in jail. So the moment one of them gets prosecuted, the rest of them will start to just fade away, because these aren't, we're not dealing with hardcore gang members or anything like that. These are spoiled kids who are allowed to dress in black and basically live action role play because our district attorney won't do anything about it. That's essentially what's going on.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing the people you describe saying, hey, why don't you, get together with a few of your jiu-jitsu buddies and make it happen. Yeah. For one, you're 6'8", so you're going to be pretty easy to spot. I don't know how many, other than the Portland Trailblazers, I don't know how many 6'8" dudes are walking around Portland. But also it's like, this isn't, the plot to some 80s movie where it's like, the gang is taken over and the vigilantes, have to step up. And also you're put in this terrible position where, like you said, if the business owner comes out to defend himself, the one thing he can rely on is that he won't be prosecuted for it.
Right.
And I had a sort of something that happened recently, a problem with a neighbor that I've had in my building in Brooklyn, where the guy followed me from the elevator to my apartment. And the reason why is because I wasn't wearing a mask inside the building. And this guy I've had a problem with before. This dude has a history of, he actually attacked another neighbor last year for not wearing a mask outside. It's insane, right? And, this guy, followed me and was yelling about, where is your mask? Put your mask on and all that. And I responded with, basically saying the worst things you possibly can say to a man, to him. And there were a number of times when this took a while. And there were a number of times when I said, do you want to fight me? Like, what are you doing? Right. Well, what's going on here? And at no point did I think legally would I be protected had I laid hands on the guy,
Sure.
But it's one of these things where you have these people who are sort of taking advantage of the law, like they're going to step up to this point and they're not going to cross this line because they know that they're protected. And it's really unfortunate for people with a lot to lose. Here I am, I'm the last 2 weeks I've been basically leaving New York to move to the suburbs. And one of the last days I got to deal with this douchebag, and and all my friends telling me, don't get arrested, don't assault the guy. And I'm like, I don't want any of that.
Right.
I have a house, I have a family.
Right.
And then when you have people with nothing to lose, that's what you deal with.
Yeah. Exactly. The other thing people have to realize is groups like Antifa in particular are very good at setting up situations. That's the one thing that they're good at. So what they do is they intentionally provoke people until they lash out. And once they lash out, they film that part of it. And then, they'll swarm in and try and beat the guy, 10-1. But they always have the cameras going and they're always going to film that part of it. So, you have to be really careful.
Yeah.
Because they're actually looking to set up people like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, and it just so happens this guy was filming me too. Yeah. Not during the whole thing. Not during the whole part, but at various stages. Yeah, he was he was he was filming me for sure. With something that I think I talked to you about over Twitter, something that I've been noticing with in particular this guy Jake Paul, who is, I guess, a YouTuber who's been training boxing for a little while, and he's been, calling out other fighters and doing it in a rather disrespectful manner. And over the years, me as being a fan of mixed martial arts and also training, some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I hold a lot of the mixed martial artists in very high regard. And in particular, some of the guys that he was calling out. Right. And something that I noticed is that all of the call outs that he has, it's to guys like Conor McGregor, or I guess now Daniel Cormier, to come and box him, as opposed to come and fight him. Right. Which, as we all know, boxing is an amazing sport, but it's a sport of punches as opposed to a sport of, you can get dunked on your head. Right. And then kicked in the face with a soccer kick. What do you make of I guess this recent phenomenon?
Yeah, I haven't seen that particular tweet but I've this is something that's been going on ever since we've had social media. So Connor gets called out all the time by all kinds of people. This guy might want to be careful with just boxing with Connor, but of course none of those guys they have nothing to gain. They have no reason to even engage with somebody like that. And it makes me wonder sometimes too, whether social media is something that actually adds to people's mental illness. It's certainly not, it's not a healthy thing. And I'm sure that guy's getting off on the attention that he gets from this kind of circumstance, which is, where else would that happen absent social media? I don't, he'd be in a street corner back in the day having to stand. He'd be that guy that's standing on the street corner that yells at people when they walk by.
Right.
If we didn't have that medium. So
yeah, there's something about social media that it's almost like if I'm able to slide into your DMs, then somehow I'm on the same level as you. So, right. So I've had experiences in the past on Twitter that blow me away, in that it was some years back, and there was the movie Straight Outta Compton that came out, and it was about the NWA, the rap group, and who made a cameo in it but Tyron Woodley, a UFC welterweight fighter, and he was a part, and the scene that he was in, he was a part of a crew that had a fight with I guess Ice Cube's crew, and I tweeted out a joke and said, it was really great to see Tyron Woodley in that scene, but if you watch the scene, it's pretty clear he still needs to work on his cardio. Which at the time was a dig on Tyron Woodley, who was told that he didn't have, a gas tank and all that.
Right.
And who responds to my tweet but the Tyron Woodley, wow, who said, the first tweet was, why is it ever, it was something along the lines of, no matter what you do, you're always going to have people hating on you. And then the second one was a joke. That he made. He's like, yeah, but at least I wasn't the guy who got thrown off the escalator. Right. So he was coming, he was coming at it as a joke. And I responded to him. I'm like, dude, it's insane. Like, I have such, I respect you so much as a fighter. It's insane that I could put out something like a stupid joke and have you see it. I can't wait to watch you fight again, Yeah. And so we live in a world where me, a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, can make a joke about a high-level future, champion, right? Yeah. And they can actually see it. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is.
And I think I made a joke about Cormier. It was Cormier and who was he fighting? Anthony Rumble Johnson. And I just put something out where I'm like, can't you guys settle this without violence? And he responded to that as, the joke that it was. And it's just, it's pretty unbelievable, just the times that we're living in, where we're able to do that. Something that I've also noticed with social media, I put something out. This is so self-referential, everything that I'm talking to you about. I made a joke basically about how kung fu only works in the Matrix, in the movie The Matrix.
True.
And man, did I get some hate from some kung fu stands coming at me and all that. And so, maybe we could talk a little bit about, quote unquote, traditional martial arts and the positives and the negatives about them as you see it.
Sure. So going back to what got me interested in martial arts is I was interested in what works and what doesn't work in fighting. And one of the positive things I'll say about my years of doing Jeet Kune Do, because I did teach it for a while as well, is I got exposed to all these different Jeet Kune Do instructors and all these different kinds of martial arts. So that was good. So I got to see a lot of different systems. And over time, I started to realize that what makes something work, what makes martial arts style work, because those kind of questions, especially pre-UFC, like what Wing Chun versus Shotokan karate or this and that, it's like who would win in a fight, a bear or a tiger? Like those kind of questions, just ubiquitous. And I realized it's the training method. So it's not the technique, but it's how the art's trained. And the one thing that all functional martial arts tend to have in common is they're sports. And because they're sports, the outcome matters. And because the outcome matters, they use an opponent process. So they use a live form of training and they test it. They have a feedback mechanism, which is, you get tapped out or you get hit. And from that, you can learn and actually develop real timing. And that's what makes martial arts functional. It's what I basically call aliveness. So one word can kind of sum it up. And when I say aliveness, I don't necessarily mean sparring or pressure testing. I mean, the arts are taught in such a way that as you're learning the techniques, which are activity specific, they're not techniques you have to change. Like you practice a punch this way, but in a real fight, you have to punch this way. No, you practice the way you would against an aggressive resisting opponent, the techniques that you would do with a sense of timing. It doesn't have to be rough, but it doesn't have to be full contact, but there's always timing. Just like you and I can roll and train in jiu-jitsu in a very gentle way, but it's still alive. And so that was the important message that I wanted to get out. In the first 10 years of my martial arts career is basically just me talking about aliveness. I released a video set on that subject in, I think it was, I don't know, very early 90s, maybe 1990. And no, it would have been a little after that, 93, somewhere there. Anyway, that subjected me to, which I'm perfectly fine with, but 10 years of having traditional martial arts write me hate email and call the gym and leave voicemails threatening to come kill me and all that kind of stuff. So, when I'm talking about martial arts systems, I'm talking about a system. I'm not talking about people. Even when I talk about Jeet Kune Do, I'm not trying to put down Dan Inosanto or anybody else. I'm just talking honestly about the training methods, because I've always thought that if we don't talk honestly about the training methods, you can't improve them. And the problem with martial arts and with many things is people get attached to those training methods and it becomes a form of identity. And then they feel like you're attacking them. So you're saying my Kung Fu doesn't work. It becomes a personal insult. And then you have to unwind all that. That, going back to what you mentioned about Rokas, one of the things that was what impressed me about Rokas. Number one, he tested what he was doing, which showed me that he had a sincere desire to know the truth, which is admirable and to some degree rare. But number two, once that reality had hit home, he decided to let go of all that stuff. And he owned a school. That's how he put food on the table, was teaching Aikido. And he let it go to pursue truth. And I find that really admirable and extremely rare and healthy. So I think it's been great for Rokas, and it launched a whole new career for him. But so many other traditional martial artists or people will either not have those encounters because they don't really want to know the truth, and then they have to spend the rest of their life dodging and defending this kind of fake authority, or they'll have one of those come to Jesus moments where they get to meet a Rickson Gracie or get in a ring with a boxer. And rather than actually change course, they just double down on the bad training methods. And I've never found that to be a healthy thing for human beings to do.
Yeah. Some of the videos that I still absolutely love watching are the early Gracie challenge videos.
Yeah.
And I forget who narrates.
Orion.
Horian narrates them.
Yeah.
And man, if you watch some of these things, I mean, you have Horian narrating and saying basically all those years of training mean
Yes.
absolutely nothing.
Yes.
It's almost like I don't know how to explain it. I guess it's almost like you've been dating this person for 10 years,
yeah.
and it turns out they're not the person that they say they are. That
yeah.
And it's so crushing, to hear him narrate that and to watch this person flail, or as I guess Sam Harris described it, like drowned.
Yeah.
It's really wild. And when I did you ever, when you were receiving hate from like the traditional martial artists, I just imagine like you receiving a picture of your face on a makiwara and like a dude saying, "I'm going to smash." I think
I've actually gotten that before. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. You gotta hang that up.
Yeah.
And when what I found in my recent online war against the kung fu stands, one of the arguments that the guy made was, well, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu won't help you against multiple attackers, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, 3 or 4 guys, I guess it would be pretty difficult any art form to be able to handle, though.
Yeah. Horian has a very good answer to that, which is, could you fight more than one of yourself? There's something really egotistical about the question. It's as if you could fight 3 or 4 people, right? Could I fight 2 of me? No. The thing people have to remember about fighting, so for the longest time, the main criticism you'll get against Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or really any combat sport, the first one is, well, that's a sport. In the street, it's different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in that one, I just explain to people that there's no magical street technique. There's no street mount. It's the same positions on the pavement as it is on the mat. And so if you're skilled in those core delivery systems, just like it's the same punch. If you punch somebody in the face in the street, it doesn't magically change from the ring. If you're skilled in those delivery systems, you're going to be skilled wherever. Nobody would want to exchange punches with Mike Tyson in the street,
right?
Just because it's a sport. And then the second one is, well, what about multiple opponents? And there is no art that's going to let you deal with multiple opponents effectively. But the thing people need to remember is, it's a fight, and the very nature of a fight is you don't get to choose where you're going to be sometimes. You may, when the more people there are, the more likely it is you're going to wind up on the ground. One of our SBG black belts, Paul Sharp, was actually a undercover guy for a long time and worked in the gang task force. And he had a gang come to kill him at his house. So they showed up while it was middle of winter. There was ice everywhere. He's in Chicago. It's super cold. He's bringing groceries from the car into his house. His wife and kids are inside the house. And I forget how many he said initially, but I think it was 4 or 5 of them show up with a pit bull, and they attack him at the door of his car and release the pit bull on him.
Jesus.
The first thing that happens, because it's icy, is he winds up falling and he's on the ground underneath the car. And what saved him was his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because he was able to actually control and put the other guy between the dog and him, and hold that guy on the ground and position himself in such a way that they couldn't get to him. And then I guess what happened was the dog, which they probably hadn't treated very well, turned on them. At which point he got back to his feet and ended up in the fight. But it was his ability to control position and space on the ground that helped him there. There's what martial art is going to give you the magical pill to solve that problem? There, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah. And when it comes to you training people and enrolling with people, so something that I discovered, and I think I'm definitely not the first person to say this, but you learn a lot about yourself when you're put into that situation, if you are even rolling and that sort of thing. And a few years ago, I was training with my coach, and he had to tell me that a lot of guys didn't want to roll with me. And and I said, why don't they want to roll with me? And he's like, he's like, they were afraid I was going to hurt them. And what I mean by hurt them is, he's like, there's a look that comes on your face, Lou, that you don't realize, where it's sort of like, I'm taking things out in the rolling, that problems that I'm having in life, whether it's stress or shit that I'm dealing with, it's coming out. And I'm like, but I'm a nice guy. Like, I wouldn't want to hurt any of these people, but it's coming out. And it was really difficult. It was tough to be told that by, you know, someone I respect. I love the guy. Whereas like, wow, I really have to work on this stuff if I want to be a good partner, but also if I just want to be able to control what I'm doing, you know,
Yes.
and control myself.
Yeah, that's super common.
Yeah.
Super common. And you know, yeah, it's good that you have a coach that is willing to sit down and have a conversation with you and tell you about that.
Yeah.
Because very often they won't, and then it's basically left to play out on the mat. Over time, you kind of figure it out yourself, but he really helps you, you know, get a steep learning curve again by giving you a heads up on that. But I see that all the time. It's very normal.
Yeah.
Very normal thing. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and functional martial arts in general, but especially Jiu-Jitsu. And the reason with Jiu-Jitsu is because you can spar the way you were there multiple times a week. You can't do that with MMA. You can't, you know, judo is hard to get the falls, wrestling's rough, but Jiu-Jitsu of all functional martial arts is the most gentle. And so you can train in a very realistic fashion, you know, over and over again every week. And that process reveals things to yourself and to other people about your character, about how you perform in stressful situations, about whether or not you can remain comfortable in stressful situations. And those kind of things are priceless, you know, priceless information that you get to feedback about yourself that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I spoke about this with my therapist a while ago, where I was trying to describe it. So I was rolling with my coach, and he had my back for, I think like it was a good 10 minutes or so. And I wasn't allowing him to, to get the tap, if you will. You know, I was doing a good job defending it. Right. But it was like 10 minutes, you know, it was kind of like a pain in the ass. And I was going over this because he and I had this discussion, you know, shortly thereafter. And I was trying to describe it to my therapist. And I said, I don't care about winning. I just don't want to lose. Right. And what That's I was, good. You know, and I was taking something that was outside of the school and bringing it in there. I didn't want to lose a lot of other stuff that was going on. Yeah. But I'm not going to grow if I'm not prepared to lose, you know, to allow, right. Hey, he's got me. Let's start it again.
Yeah. Well, two things there. Sure. First thing is you articulated Rickson Gracie's version of jiu-jitsu. So, you know, Rickson would often say, you know, you can't always win, but you never have to lose. And so for him, winning is about survival, which that came from his dad. Elio's original version was, if you just survive, you win. And so there's I think a great deal of value in just training that way and training and focusing on survival. So number one, I think that's good. But the flip side, like you said, is in order to grow, you have to put yourself in vulnerable positions. It's just necessary. And so, you know, you have to allow other people to get into certain places so you can work from there. That's an important part of jiu-jitsu. And if you're not failing sometimes, you're doing it wrong, because failure is an essential part of the process. It's not just okay. It's a necessary ingredient in getting better. So there's a balance there. But I think training overall to survive, I think, is fantastic.
And I think the first time that I ever came across your stuff, it was years and years ago, and it was through I think we call it probably like the New Atheists or the Skeptics Movement. Okay. And how did you get into that? And was that an influence on, you know, your martial arts journey as well?
Yeah. I'm going to do the long and short, but I'm going to give you the short version of this. I had some unusual experiences all my life, but in particular, right around the time I turned 30. Some of them were drug induced and some of them were not. So some of them involved hallucinogenics and a couple of them didn't. But, you know, they made me question reality and the nature of reality and everything else. And for the better part of, I would say almost 10 years, I went deep into Buddhism and things like that, but in particular, certain branch of Hinduism, to try and find answers to, and other things. But what I was trying to do was find answers to what I'd experienced. And I realized actually in hindsight on a couple of different occasions, which were, you know, those rough nights when you look back and you realize, you know, maybe you hadn't been acting so well, but you didn't figure it out until later, which I've had many of those experiences, that I was probably at my most selfish during that time. You know, I was thinking about all these what I'd consider profound experiences, but in reality, my behavior, you know, I wasn't treating people kindly. I wasn't focusing on my kids and my relationships the way I should have. And so there was a disconnect there. It was right about the time that I was figuring that out that I read Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith. And that, I really love that book. Sam's writing and argument, I think, was absolutely clear. He won me over with the argument, but also I felt like he understood what I was talking about. Like I could have a conversation with him about some of those experiences, and it wouldn't be, you know, a woo-woo conversation. And so that's what led me into the New Atheist. And I wrote Sam actually sometime after that. We started talking and communicating on a regular basis after that. And sure enough, he understood exactly what I was talking about. But the thrust of his main argument that got me was, you know, you can't pretend to know things you don't know. So my answer to those things that had happened in the past and that experience is, if you ask me, it's like, I don't know. You know, I'm not going to pretend I know what all that means. I don't know the answer to that. And that was very powerful because that tied back into my martial arts. You know, when you have the Aikido guy we're talking about who has the experience, and unlike Rokas, he doesn't let it go. What he's doing after that is he's pretending to know things he doesn't know. And he may even know he's pretending, which makes it even worse. But I saw that for that brief flirtation of years I had, you know, and kind of, for lack of a better term, the New Age community. I saw so much of that. I saw so many people with this pretense to knowledge, and in reality, they had no idea. And so, yes. So after that, I had 4 or 5 years where I'd really concluded that the major problem is people pretending to know things they don't know. And along those lines is religion. You can't get a better example of pretending to know things you don't know than religion. So I really set my sights on religion. And what happened was, after spending a couple of years in the atheist community, I realized, you know, I don't like a lot of these people. I don't enjoy spending time with them. And that was about the same time that it started to convert into a really kind of heavy far left social justice warrior type thing. And I was just like, I had more in common in terms of values, and I enjoyed talking to conservative Christians I would argue with about these topics. I enjoyed spending time with them more than I did these, you know, far left atheists. And that's about the time when I kind of dropped out of that movement. And one of my friends is also one of my students, Peter Boghossian. I think his experiences mimic mine. You know, you just get to a certain point where you realize that, you know, a lot of these people just really aren't good people. So, you know, once again, it's not about, it comes down to how you treat people. It's not about what you know or don't know.
Yeah, I think I came to the New Atheists in a very similar way. When I was younger, I had a habit of taking naps during parties. So if there was a barbecue and it's like, where's Lou? Oh, he's in the basement taking a nap. Not drug-induced naps, just, you know, just naps. And yeah, it was at my brother's house in Westchester, and I went down in the basement, and the TV was on, and what was on but book TV, and who was speaking but this guy who kind of looked like, who did he look like? Well, now I'm forgetting his name. Wait. it turned out it was Sam Harris,
Yeah.
and his book that was out was the End of Faith, and he was talking, and I'm like, how is it possible that this guy who I've never met and never heard of is saying exactly what I'm thinking, but saying it in such a a much clearer way? Whereas, like, I wish I could take the words that he was saying and have them come out of my mouth. So you're reading the end of the End of Faith, and then A Letter to a Christian Nation. And then obviously at that time it was a very interesting time too, because there was, I would describe it, there wasn't that, I wouldn't describe it as tension between atheists and theists. There were so many debates happening. There were so many gatherings, Christopher Hitchens against Dinesh D'Souza against Sam Harris, all over. It seemed like there was a lot more communication at the time on that subject than you would expect. It's almost like it was a completely different era.
Yes, it really was. In many ways, it feels like we went backwards. That was incredibly healthy time. You had people having what would normally be difficult conversations. But that kind of goes back to what I was saying before. You could, a lot of those people, well, you may not, I may not, or Sam may not agree with them about, the nature of reality and the origins of life on the planet or whatever it is. You could converse with them. Yeah. They would argue in good faith with you. They would honestly, in many cases, tell you what they actually believed, and then state their points for it. And then afterwards, everybody could go out and have a drink, and it would be good. And that was such a very different dynamic from what goes on now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, if you can discuss, the nature of the universe, the existence or non-existence of God, I mean, you can't get much higher than that. No. I mean, that is, the biggest topic. The idea that we can't discuss, or we can't debate whether or not, the value of critical race theory or anti-racism, or whether or not the founding of the United States has slavery in its DNA, or I feel like a throwback to an era, a bygone era that isn't that far away, that isn't that long ago, where for me, what I think the Skeptics movement did was it opened up the idea that you can talk about anything and you can argue about anything, and that there aren't any limits on what you could on what you can discuss.
Yeah. And I think in hindsight, it's pretty easy to see that the people that we're talking about that we both respect, like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and even Daniel Dennett and all of them, they're all, I would say, true liberals in, it's such a cliche now, but in the classical sense of the word. They're classical liberals that actually would stand up for free speech. Think about, I remember watching a lecture Christopher Hitchens gave at a synagogue on why it's important to allow Holocaust deniers to speak, which takes balls. And he was articulate and sincere and took questions afterwards. And, that's a true liberal. And I think, what viscerally, I just felt like I don't like these people, but viscerally that was my feeling. But in reality, what was going on is a lot of the other people were not actually liberals. So you had a great deal of people who were essentially authoritarians in that group, kind of masked as liberals. And I think that unfortunately they've taken over most of those institutions now.
And as we look to the future, so I'm a new dad. My son is he just turned 1 a month ago, and we have another one on the way, due out. The release is scheduled for October of this year. Thank you. You're a father yourself, and
I have 5.
And you have 5?
I have 5 kids. Yeah.
No way. Well, yeah. I'm one of 5 actually. So, wow, 5 kids.
I'm trying to talk my wife out of having a 6th right now. So we'll see.
And your wife is game? Your wife is like,
she wants to have another baby for sure.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations to you too. Well, what's the age range?
Well, I had a previous marriage, so I have 2 boys.
Okay.
From my previous marriage, Liam and Hunter, they're both in their 20s.
Okay.
And doing their own thing, living their life. And then I have 3 little ones at home. So I have a daughter who's 11. I always get the ages wrong. 8, another daughter who's 8, and then I have my 3-year-old.
3-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's amazing. So when I have the opportunity to talk to dads, especially, seasoned veterans who've been in the game, how has fatherhood changed, the way that you look at martial arts, the universe, what's it done to you?
Yeah, that's and my wife are probably the biggest factors in any kind of actual growing up and maturity that I've experienced. But I had the ability to do it twice. I raised the boys when they were young, and I realized that at the time I wasn't around a whole lot, and I wasn't around not because I wasn't with their mom or off screwing around, but I was just working. I was trying to build my business, and I had no employees, and I was the only one, and so I was doing whatever, the 80-hour week job, trying to build my company. And in the process, I missed, the boys through those early years, and you can't get that back. So when my wife said she wanted to have babies, and we had Annika, my daughter, on the way, I realized I don't want to do that again. I want to be around. So number one, it motivated me to be a little smarter about business and a little smarter with my finances so that I could actually manage my time and be home, which I've done. So that's been good. And that affects everything. So with martial arts, my only goal at 52, to be honest, at this age, is to be able to continue to roll. That's all I care about. So I want to be able to roll with my grandkids in my 80s. I want to roll till the day I die. I know I'm not going to be happy if I can't wrestle on the mat. So everything I do in terms of fitness and diet, anything that I do like that, it's motivated by the desire to be able to always roll. And my kids have played a role in that too. I realized that's the most important thing for me by far when it comes to jiu-jitsu, so those would probably be the major factors.
Yeah.
That appreciation for time, you never get it back.
Yeah. And with my son, I was telling you earlier that we're moving out of our 1-bedroom apartment into a legitimate house, which is great. And so for over a year, we had our son in this 1-bedroom apartment, sleeping in the same room as me and my wife. The lack of sleep is a real thing, and all that, but also just my son sort of being trapped in this box, and now with the house, getting to see him with some space, and just how that changes things completely. Like his demeanor, he's walking better now. He's like exploring. And and then I look back and it's sort of like, man, where the hell did this year go? It's it's insane. Yeah. One last thing that I want to talk to you about, because it's funny. We come from a very wholesome discussion, and now I want to talk about teenagers having knife fights and how that was the norm, according to some people. So recently, I think everyone has seen the video. Yeah. Teenagers are having a big brawl in the street. One teen has a knife, attempts to stab another teen, and a police officer shoots that person with the knife, and that girl dies, and horrible video. I hate watching videos like that. It's truly disgusting. And I was expecting to see more reactions of, man, this is really terrible. How awful that must be. But rather, one of, I think, the most popular tweets I saw about it was something along the lines of, hey, kids have been having knife fights for eons. Yeah. And blah, blah, blah. We don't need like a white police officer to, and I was like, this is next level. I'm like, how did we got here really quickly? What was your take on this whole thing?
Yeah, I was, reading the same thing, had the same reaction you did, my head in my hands. I cannot believe what I'm seeing. And then I thought about it, and it's kind of predictable in a way. The conversation from the very beginning, whether we go back to Michael Brown or back to the Trayvon Martin case, which is what I think gave birth to the BLM, has never been about facts. It's never been about data. It's never been about what actually happens. If people were actually concerned about what actually happens, the first thing you do is you'd look at the data. If there are racist police officers doing racist things, I want to know about it. I think everybody wants to know about it. Americans want to know. Nobody's okay with that. And the first thing that we would have to do to figure that out is we'd have to look at the data, not just part of the data, but all of the data. And that's the one thing that does not happen. And so, of course, all the networks care about, all CNN cares about, all BLM cares about is the race of the officer. It's not about the victims. It's not about anybody else. It's about the race of the officer. And so as soon as you find out that officer's white, knee-jerk reactions are, of course, it's murder. How else could, he gets out of the car and 20 seconds later, there's a dead young girl and it's murder. Thank God that there was a body cam, because from the other cameras, I couldn't necessarily see the knife from the wider view, but with his body cam, it's obvious that she has a big knife she's about to plunge in the other girl's stomach. And so then, am I expecting these same people to then back up and go, oh, well, in hindsight, actually, this may have been, no. Now they have to double down. So what else can you say? Kids have always been knife fighting. Like, that becomes what you have to say. So I feel for the girl's family. I feel for the officer and the officer's family. He's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life. I think that was, if ever there was a righteous shoot, it was that. He had no other option. He was in a position where you couldn't holster your gun and go for anything else. That other girl was literally had a knife going towards her.
Right.
So he did what he had to do, and thankfully he's a good shot, and nobody else got shot except for the aggressor. And and then what people who don't know anything about violence, which is a lot of people in the United States and a lot of politicians don't understand, is how dangerous knives are. Right. People have in their mind that there might be some kind of, why couldn't he take the knife away from her or have some sort of training, and they just literally have no idea how deadly knives can be.
Yeah. And I think a number of people shared another article where a 13-year-old was stabbed to death by another 13-year-old. And I don't know if it was the same city or a different city. But I guess, bringing this around to, fatherhood and parenting, I didn't grow up where knife fights were the norm. This isn't, Rebel Without a Cause where switchblades are the norm, or West Side Story and all that. I'd be friggin' horrified if I found out that my kids were taking part in these in knife fights. I think it says quite a bit, though, the times that we're living in, like you said, like so few people actually know about violence, where it's almost like, okay, that's a good thing. But then when you get takes like that, it's like, well, that's the downside of having that ignorance.
It is. It's the downside of having it. People will say things like, why doesn't he shoot him in the leg? This kind of, or shoot her in the leg. People don't understand about guns. People don't understand about knives. So there's a process of education that has to go there. And it's certainly not helped when you have people who should know better, like President Biden, talking about shooting people in the legs. And then it just creates a whole unnecessary conversation. We have to explain to people why, that's not a good idea and why that won't work. But also, just like you said, going back to parenthood, the first thing everybody thinks about is the police officer. The police officer was doing his job. He was doing what he's supposed to do. He was there because he was supposed to be there, and they asked him to be there. And he did what he had to do, and he'll have to live with that for the rest of his life, unfortunately. But thankfully, he was there. But instead of thinking about the police officer, and the first thing everybody wants to do is jump on the police officer, where the hell are the parents? Where's this girl's dad?
Yeah.
Why is your daughter out in a knife fight in the front yard right now? You think that might inspire a little self-reflection, but if it doesn't, then I don't really think there's any hope for any of this to getting changed, because the net result of what's going to happen now is police officers are going to be slower to respond to situations like that. They're going to be more tentative to take shots like that. There's going to be less proactive policing. That's what's going on right now. And what's going to happen is there's going to be thousands more people killed in the United States than would otherwise be killed. We can already see it this year, thousands. You can see what's going on in places like Chicago, where somebody just walked into McDonald's and just opened fire and killed a little child in there. That doesn't even make the news because it's so common. And that is I think that's what people don't realize when you lie about an issue like this, when you lie about what's going on with police officers in the United States, when you don't have a serious conversation about the data, the consequences are a lot of dead bodies. That's what's going to happen in this country. And it's inevitable. It's too late to fix it. You know, if we all of a sudden had a change of heart here in Portland, it would still take a couple of years for us to get the police department back up to staff of what it's going to be. So in the meantime, over this next year or 2 years or however long, there's going to be a lot more kids and people dead than would otherwise have to be dead.
Well, shit.
That's a bummer note to end the conversation on, but that's just unfortunately the reality of it.
Yeah. Well, Matt Thornton, thank you so much, man, for spending time with me, chatting about all these subjects. Once again, Straight Blast Gym, please check it out. And I hear you have a book that you're working on.
Yes, just finished it. I have a publisher. I'll be announcing that, and I'll definitely let you know as soon as I get any dates on that.
That's awesome, man. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to support the show, please head over to thelouperez.locals.com and go ahead and support my sponsors. Black Organic Cold Brew, head over to www.blvckbrew.com and use the promo code LOU for free shipping. And if you head over to Paloma Verde, www.palomaverdestore.com and use the promo code LOU, you'll get 25% off purchases over $75. And if you sign up for email, you'll get an extra 10% off. All right, later.